To let this beautiful Japan keep growing, to be released from the wicked hands of the Americans and British, and to build a free Asia was our goal. Nothing has changed. This quote was said by Second Lieutenant Shigeku Suzuki of the Japanese Army explaining the changes in Japan. Japan's efforts to avoid being another area dominated by Western imperialism were extremely effective due to their willingness to adapt their nation to the tenets of Western civilization. Before worldwide imperialism was in full force, Japan was relatively secluded and lacked modernity compared to the Western nations of the time period, especially in terms of trading, technology, military, and political theory.
Modernity can be defined as the idea of a culture in which those who have the desire to change will take practical steps to advance society in order to ensure the well-being of its citizens. Japan, while they did undergo major changes to their country as a whole, were not imperialized because they made a conscious decision to change their ways, unlike any other nation. The thing that set Japan apart was its ability to decide for itself how to make the process of opening the door for its own improvement. By the time the age of imperialism passed by, Japan had evolved themselves into a global power that could be felt throughout the modern world.
The Industrial Revolution in Europe transformed Western nations and elevated their military and technology to a level never seen before. While these areas experienced groundbreaking advancements, it created a huge gap between them and underdeveloped countries such as Japan. During this time, Japan was being intruded upon by the United States. Commodore Matthew Perry's presence was felt throughout Japan from the moment his black ships of men arrived in 1853 at Edo Bay, which is now modern-day Tokyo, until he eventually left the vast land.
Ironically, the ships that he brought into Japan inspired them to build a powerful naval force over the course of the Meiji Restoration. There was a moment in history when the Japanese realized how miserably behind the rest of the world they were, and therefore the Satsuma and Chosun clans reversed their position on foreign influence to push for greater access to Western military technology.
With this new emphasis on military and technological needs, Japan began to industrialize and greatly strengthen their military and naval forces. A major factor in their military expansion was in 1885 with the influence of German officer Clemens Mikkel. He focused on modernizing the Japanese army and bringing discipline to the soldiers. As Japan increased its military might, they then sought to exert their power on other nations, especially Korea and China. Japan continued to carve China and keep their presence into Korea until their defeat at the end of World War II. Japan's exposure to Western imperialism and technological ideas was a major factor in how they were able to avoid Western imperialism.
The Meiji Restoration proved detrimental in governmental reforms. The Japanese leaders, led by Emperor Meiji, knew that they would have to make extraordinary reforms to continue as one of the few world's hegemons. Most important in their string of reforms was the necessity to diminish the past traditional cultural values and practices and to reimburse slaves, samurais, and traditional leaders. In turn, the Japanese government was to undergo drastic changes to its political system. Thus, the Charter Oath was created and the desires of the Japanese government were established. The oath was a written guideline for what the government wanted and stressed the need for equality and uniformity throughout Japan. It directly proved to the United States that Japan could and was going to change, and they didn't need an outside force controlling their every move.
In addition to this, feudalism was abolished from Japan in almost all areas, and a new centralized government with views and benefits for all people was set into place. As the Encyclopedia of Asian History cites, the events of 1868 replaced the decentralized structure of late feudalism with a centralized modern state, one committed to building the national power that would enable Japan to compete in the international order. Japan's new government was one of the most important factors, if not the most important, to separate Japan from the US. They were able to prove their independence to the US, which in turn made the US not so engaged in the affairs of Japan.
The process of Japan militarizing themselves to avoid being taken over led to an invaluable opportunity to become an active participant in global exchanges for the first time in their history. Japan had little to no leeway when discussing about if they should reform to the ways the US wanted them to. However, Japan has clearly shown that you do not have to embrace Western culture in order to modernize your economy and prosper. The Treaty of Kawagawa allowed two ports to be opened for global trading, but mostly for the United States and Japan's trading. While Japan started with only trading with the United States, in the following years, the United States seemed to be chipping away at Japan's traditional side until 1868, when the Meiji Restoration disrupted the United States' desire for worldwide trading. Before Japan had been open to the world of exchanges, its economy was solely based upon agriculture within its own boundaries. Japan was able to go against the norm when they took on the United States in a war against reform. They did the one thing that the US had wanted them to do from the beginning. They changed. They remodeled their entire social, political, and economic structure and were no longer ruled by traditional rulers or customs that plagued their country for so many decades. These changes brought forth revolutionary-like benefits and allowed Japan to be one of the biggest hegemon leaders at the time.